So, what are the best cities in the United States, cities or towns, for people who are right wing, but who want a city that is walkable and has some degree of historic architecture? Surprisingly, there actually are some places that at least somewhat fit these criteria. Now, a few caveats. None of these places are metropolitan areas of over 1 million people. So if you're looking for a big city, unfortunately, nowhere fits the criteria. All the places I looked at are in either red states or purple states, at least they currently are. Like a lot are in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania used to be a blue state, but now it's a purple state. If anything, purple leaning red. Like it went red in both 2024 and 2016, I believe. So yeah, um, I guess those are the main caveats. And one thing before I get started, as far as Canada goes, unfortunately, nowhere in English Canada really meets the criteria at all because all our walkable cities and even like medium-sized towns that have decent walkability and historic architecture are overwhelmingly shitlib, with the exception of Quebec City. Now, Quebec City, again, is a very French city. So forget about it if you're a unilingual Anglophone. Also, it really depends on how you consider the Parti Québécois, because if you consider them a right wing or left wing party, they're kind of mixed. They're sort of Nazbol gang in a way because they're kind of like socially conservative in some ways, like in terms of like ethnocultural preservation, like by Canadian standards, like for the Québécois people, but they're also like socially liberal on some other issues like LGBT stuff. I'm not sure exactly how where they stand on like feminist stuff. And I'm not sure how super woke they are on LGBTism, but yeah, economically they're kind of like center left, I suppose. So yeah, they're sort of like a bit outside the conventional left-right spectrum, just like how I am. But again, they're a bit less radical in both regards than I am. Like I'm probably more economically socialist and more socially conservative than they are. But yeah. Regardless, though, Canada doesn't have anywhere really for Anglophones that meets these criteria, unfortunately, which sucks. Believe me, it sucks for me as an English speaking Canadian, because I'd love to have a place like this. But yeah, of the places I looked at, the main criteria. Now there are some criteria I looked at. I looked at what percentage of the population voted for Trump in the latest election. Now, unfortunately, I was only able to get these statistics on the county level and not on the municipal level. I'm not sure how if you can even get these statistics reliably on a municipal level for any election. But yeah, countywide, I looked at how many people voted for Trump, and I'm only considering places on the list where over 40% of the county voted for Trump. And once again, these are all in red or purple states. Like these are all states that voted for Trump as a whole in 2024. And I think, yeah, in 2016 also, yes, they all voted for Trump as a whole, these states. Not in 2020, though. Pennsylvania did not in 2020. And neither, I think Georgia didn't either. So, yeah. But so that's the first criteria is to what extent they voted for Trump. Crime rate is another criteria. So if the crime rate is super high, like there were some cities that met some of the criteria otherwise, like York, Pennsylvania, and Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, but the crime rate is just so damn high that I had to leave them off the list. Um, the next criteria is white percentage, and again, this if you're not white, then obviously this isn't probably isn't an important criteria for you. But if you are, I mean, if you're right wing and you're white, you're probably concerned with what the white percentage is. So yeah, not all these cities are over like majority white, but it was so hard to find ones that are and that meet all these criteria that like I kept it on the list as something to look at. But frankly, like a lot of these cities like are not majority white or even plurality white. But I mean, you got to take what you can get these days. So take it or leave it in that sense. Um, Access to Amtrak, like, can you get to other cities through intercity rail from these cities using Amtrak? or using commuter rail, but actually, I don't think any of them have access to any kind of like metropolitan commuter rail system, even the ones that are sort of near Philadelphia. So it's basically just Amtrak in that regard. And none of these cities, sadly, have their own rail transit networks. Like none of them have a subway system or light rail or streetcar or anything like that, unfortunately. Historic architecture. So I look at like how much historic architecture there is, what the quality of it is. Now keep in mind, I've only been to 3 of the cities on this list. Basically all the ones outside Pennsylvania, because the vast majority on this list are in Pennsylvania. As are apparently like a disproportionate number of my followers from what I've seen. But yeah, I haven't been to any of the cities on this list from Pennsylvania, but I have been to all the others. So yeah, historic architecture. I also look at climate and natural disasters, like how good is the climate there? How frequent are natural disasters? How bad are they? And finally, cost of living. So when looking at these cities through all these criteria, every city or town on this list is in one of 2 regions in the United States. Either it's in the southeast on the Atlantic coast, which is 3 different ones, which is Savannah, Georgia, Charleston, South Carolina, and St. Augustine, Florida. And then all of the rest of the cities on this list are in Pennsylvania, and specifically southeastern Pennsylvania. So, without further ado, I'm going to look at each city on this list and analyze it through each of these criteria. So Charleston, South Carolina, starting out, 46% voted for Trump in the recent election. The homicide rate is 5.3 per 100,000. The robbery rate, 47.9 per 100,000. Burglary, 150.3 per 100,000. Theft, 1,409 per 100,000. Okay, I'm going to stop saying per 100,000. You get that all these numbers are per 100,000. Okay. Auto theft, 330.2. The R word, I'm just going to say R word for each time I mention it. You know what I mean by R word. Violating someone in a, unwanted romance. Okay. So the 4-letter R word. Okay. 35.5. And the assault rate, this is non-R word assault. This is like regular assault. 286.2. The white percentage, again, when I'm given the white percentage for these cities, it's non-Hispanic white. So it's 72.4. 72.4%. It's actually one of the few cities where it's actually growing from year to year. So Charleston is actually getting whiter. And yes, it does have Amtrak access. And in terms of historic architecture, I'd give it a 9 out of 10. I have been to Charleston. It's a beautiful city, lots of beautiful architecture. Very like Southern European looking. Like some of the architecture would look, perfectly suitable in Spain or Southern France or Italy or Portugal. Like it could really fit in Southern Europe. It's very beautiful architecturally. And, a nice walkable historic old town. Climate and natural disasters. Okay, it loses points in this regard because it's hot as fuck in the summers and it's very prone to hurricanes. And to top it all off, you won't even believe it, but it's actually in an earthquake zone. Despite being on the East Coast, it's in a micro earthquake zone, which is really fucking annoying. It's like, what's the point of living on the East Coast if you're going to get fucking earthquakes? Like, that is just annoying. There hasn't been an earthquake there in quite a while, but there is the potential for it. So, yeah, Charleston severely loses points in that regard, which sucks, because otherwise, I would say it's the number 1 on the list. I would say it's the clear winner. But it loses a lot of points for climate and natural disasters factors. And finally, cost of living. From what I've seen, there was a map I looked at of cost of living by county. It is one of the more expensive ones on this list. Not as bad as somewhere like San Francisco or New York City, but it is more expensive than most on this list, which makes sense because it's more desirable, it's whiter, Like the white population is actually increasing there. So it makes sense that it would be more expensive. So yeah, I mean, and you kind of got to take what you could get because it's like you want a place that's both nice and cheap. It's like good luck with that. I mean, okay, maybe in Quebec if you speak French, but like otherwise in North America, it's like, yeah, good luck with that. So next on my list is Savannah, Georgia. It's similar to Charleston in a lot of ways, but maybe a little bit sketchier, for better and worse. So 41% in Savannah, in the county that it's in, voted for Trump in 2024. The homicide rate is an even 10 per 100,000. Robbery rate 73.6. Burglary rate 205.4. Theft rate 1,172. Auto theft rate 250.5. R-word rate, I think it's 27.2. Did I write a 7 or 1 there? Whatever. Assault rate 291.5. And the white percentage, the non-Hispanic white percentage, is 36.6%. Now, when I was in Savannah, it felt a lot more than that. I'm guessing a lot is tourists and a lot is also people who live in the suburbs of Savannah but go into the downtown for whatever reason, for entertainment, for fun, for work. But yeah, also, I would imagine the historic center that's another reason the historic center is actually a lot whiter than other parts that are technically in the city. I think that's actually the main reason. Like the city of Savannah includes a lot of these like inner ring suburbs that are mostly black. So the areas I was in the historic center would have been whiter significantly than the city of Savannah overall. So I think that's the reason. What's one thing to take into account also, which is why you can't 100% rely on these statistics. And yes, it has Amtrak access. Oh, there's one thing I forgot. Okay, I forgot for Charleston. There's another thing I put on this list, which is from this website I've read, the Walkability Index. So the Walkability Index for Charleston was 40, the Transit Index 24, and the Bikeability Index was 50. Now, okay, so for Savannah, walkability 44, no score for transit, bikeability is 52. So similar to, both those cities are pretty similar in that regard. For historic architecture, I'd also give Savannah a 9. It's a very beautiful city. Gorgeous architecture, like ivy-lined buildings, like very, very beautiful, very quintessential Southern Gothic. Yeah, absolutely gorgeous in that regard. Beautiful trees, beautiful buildings. It's one city that actually integrates trees with architecture very well, because some cities don't. Like sometimes the trees just like kind of hide the buildings and are a bit obtrusive. Like I found that problem in Amsterdam a bit. Whereas in Savannah, the trees and the buildings are actually well integrated and they kind of they're situated in a way where they add to the architectural beauty rather than getting in the way of it. So, in terms of climate and natural disasters, Savannah's also not a great place because, yeah, it's hot as hell in the summers and it's also prone to hurricanes. But at least, unlike Charleston, it's not in the earthquake zone. So there is that in its favor. Cost of living, it is a bit cheaper than Charleston. It's fairly average, I think, for the cities on this list, so it's not terribly expensive. But it's not the cheapest ever either. So yeah. Next city on the list is St. Augustine. So 65% in its county voted for Trump in 2024. 0 homicides. Robbery rate 33.6, burglary 181.5, theft 2,319, auto theft 114.3, R-word 40.3, and assault 262.2. The non-Hispanic white percentage is 78.7%, so that's pretty white. Now, keep in mind, for St. Augustine, I think the city of St. Augustine is technically only like 16,000 people, so it doesn't include like the whole area around it. But yeah, no, it does not have Amtrak access. The closest Amtrak station, I believe, is in Jacksonville, which is probably a bit of a drive. I would guess, I don't know, 45-minute drive, give or take. I don't know offhand. I'm just pulling that out of my ass. It got a it actually was not ranked on the Walkability Index website. For historic architecture, I'd also give St. Augustine a 9. It has a beautiful colonial old town with a lot of old Spanish buildings. And some more recent buildings, like 19th century buildings also that are kind of Spanish inspired. I think 19th century or early 20th, I'm not sure. For climate and natural disasters, same issues as Savannah, hurricanes and hot weather in the summer. No earthquakes, at least, though. Cost of living, this is one of the higher ones on the list. So it was in the same color on the map as Charleston. So yeah, this is a bit pricier. So yeah, St. Augustine does rank highly in a lot of regards. But again, like cost of living in climate/natural disasters may be an issue for some people. So yeah. The next on the list and the rest on the list are all in Pennsylvania. So next on the list is Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So 57% voted for Trump, 6.7 homicide rate, 109.7 robbery rate, 170.4 burglary rate, 1,564 theft rate, 141.7 auto theft rate, 113.1 R-word rate, 361.1 assault rate, only 38.9% non-Hispanic white. A lot of these cities in Pennsylvania have a very high Hispanic population. In some cases, it's higher than the non-Hispanic white population. So just keep that in mind. Yes, it does have Amtrak access. It has a walkability score of 81 and a bikeability score of 58 with no transit score. Historic architecture-wise, I haven't been to any of these Pennsylvania ones, but from what I've seen, I would give all of them probably like a 6 or 7 in this regard. Like they do have historic architecture that's pretty like kind of like northeastern colonial style architecture. It's just that compared to say like Charleston or Savannah, it's a bit less consistent in that regard. And there's fewer kind of like focal points, like town squares and like landmark buildings and stuff like that are really pretty. You're not going to get that quite as much in many of these Pennsylvania cities, but you will get beautiful residential neighborhoods with colonial architecture. It's just that it gets a bit inconsistent from block to block. Like you'll get sometimes one block that's really beautiful and the next not so much, but there is quite a lot of historic architecture in these cities. So I'm saying this about not just Lancaster, but all of them. I'm not going to really go over them one by one for architecture because, again, I haven't been to these cities. I'm just going off what I've seen on Street View. They all seem fairly similar in this regard. So, yeah, that's generally the architectural state of these Pennsylvania cities and towns that are on this list. And no, Philadelphia is not on this list. Philadelphia is extremely left liberal, so it is not on this list and has a very high crime rate. Let's see. Climate, natural disasters, this comes down to personal preference. I like the weather in southeastern Pennsylvania, in this part of the United States in general. Others may differ. Some people find the winters too cold. I personally don't. But again, I'm Canadian. So from my perspective, great climate and not overly prone to natural disasters. You might get the tail end of some hurricanes, but you won't get them head on because it's too far inland. Although then again, Asheville, North Carolina is fairly far inland. Yeah, that one was unexpected. And that one goes outside all, like when you see the maps of hurricane vulnerability, Asheville got totally fucked despite being outside those regions. So I don't know. I guess there's some hurricane vulnerability. But again, like these days, it seems like anywhere in the East has at least a little bit of hurricane vulnerability. So yeah, this again, I'm not going to go through this for every city in Pennsylvania separately because they're all very similar in this regard. So just like with historic architecture, for climate and natural disasters, this applies to all of them, all the ones I'm going to mention in southeastern Pennsylvania. Now for cost of living, I think they're all fairly similar, except Westchester, which I'm going to get to later, which is more expensive than the others. But yeah, cost of living seems like moderate for all these. not terribly expensive. So yeah, not the most expensive places. So you might be able to find a home that's like, yeah, not terribly expensive there. That's in a walkable historic area. So yeah, again, so that applies to all these places in southeast Pennsylvania except Westchester, which I'll make a note of later on when I cover it. Okay. So next is Allentown, Pennsylvania. 48% in its county voted for Trump in the recent election. 5.7 homicide rate, 121.5 robbery rate, 266 burglary rate, 1,536 theft rate, 224.9 auto theft rate, 40.2 R word rate, 179.8 assault rate. And by the way, when talking about these crime statistics, when looking at them relatively, like a lot of these cities are in the same range as like many of your average Canadian cities for these crime rates, with the exception of homicide, which is generally always worse in the United States than Canada, except for Winnipeg. Winnipeg would be in the same ballpark as many of these cities. But yeah, aside from homicide, they're generally in the same range as many Canadian cities for all these other types of crime. So again, these places aren't as low crime as like exurbs, like suburban like exurbs in the outer rim suburbs that are like 90% white or Asian and like have no poor people at all, and where everybody lives in detached McMansions. Like again, you're not going to find in walkable cities anywhere crime rates that low, with a few exceptions. Like maybe Quebec City's almost that low, but like I mean, but still, like, well, to be honest, St. Augustine's not very bad in that regard. Like, St. Augustine is pretty damn low for these crime rates from what I'm seeing. But, I mean, other than that, I mean, yeah, I mean, most of these cities, again, they're not terrible for crime. But, like, if you're looking for a place that's, like, you know, extremely low crime rate, then it's like exurb low. It's like, yeah, you're not going to find that in these places. Although St. Augustine, for some reason, its theft rate is higher than the other crimes. I'm guessing that has to do with tourism. Like, it's probably like tourists being dumb and leaving shit lying around. And that's another thing that offsets some of these statistics, is that some of these places are tourist towns. Like the ones outside of Pennsylvania, all three of the ones in the southeast are tourist towns. So that might offset some of these statistics also. The ones in Pennsylvania don't get a ton of tourists, despite their historic architecture. So yeah, sorry, moving on. Okay, I was on Allentown. So Allentown, Pennsylvania is 30.2% non-Hispanic white, so not terribly high. And again, it's mostly Hispanics. Like in all these places in Pennsylvania, Hispanics are either the largest or second largest after whites. So a lot of Hispanics in these cities and towns. They tend to flock to these walkable, historic Southeast Pennsylvania cities and towns for whatever reason. Maybe they like the row houses. Like it reminds them of Mexico. Like the grid pattern streets and the row houses reminds them of like the colonial style architecture in Latin America. So they feel at home there. Like that could be it. And I guess that's one thing I like about them, is their preference for that type of neighborhood. I kind of wish non-Hispanic whites would prefer it as much as they do, you know? Like, it's a problem. But, yeah, anyway, so no, there's not Amtrak access in Allentown. Walkability score 67. Transit score 37. Bikeability score 42. So yeah, next is Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, which is the twin city of Allentown. Kind of like Minneapolis, St. Paul, or Dallas, Fort Worth. Okay, so 50.4% voted for Trump, 5.3 homicide rate, robbery rate 52.7, burglary rate 160.7, theft rate 984.1, auto theft 46.1, R word 27.7. Let's see. Assault rate 50.3, Okay, and it's 55% non-Hispanic white, so higher than some of these other cities in Pennsylvania, but it is shrinking, and the Hispanic population is growing. So just keep that in mind. The ones I mentioned outside Pennsylvania, either in Charleston's case, the white population is actually growing, and the other two cases, it's shrinking but slower, kind of reflecting the national average, I guess. Whereas these Pennsylvania ones, it's actually shrinking a lot faster. Like the Hispanics are really, really moving into these places, so just keep that in mind. No Amtrak access. 67. Wait, shit. No, this was 59 walk score, 33 transit score, 45 bike score. So next is Lebanon, Pennsylvania, not to be confused with the country of Lebanon in the Middle East, which Israel is currently attacking. So 66% voted for Trump, 7.7 homicide rate, 81 robbery rate, 239.2 burglary rate, 1,300 theft rate, 88.7 auto theft rate, 19.3 R-word rate, 119.6 assault rate, and then it's 48.9% non-Hispanic white. No Amtrak access, 67 walk score, no transit score, 55 bike score. Okay, so next is Reading, Pennsylvania. 56% voted for Trump, 14.3 homicide rate, 102.4 robbery rate, 310.1 burglary rate, 972.4 theft rate, 113.6 auto theft rate, 36.8 R-word rate, 280.5 assault rate, only 21% non-Hispanic white. Not very high. No Amtrak access, 72 walk score, no transit score given, 47 bike score. And then the final town on this list is West Chester, Pennsylvania. This one's a bit smaller than some, and it's located closer to Philadelphia, but it's still in a different county. So only 42% voted for Trump, which is lower than most on this list. No homicides, 69.1 robbery rate, 143.2 burglary rate, 1,175 theft rate, 59.2 auto theft rate, 39.5 R-word rate, and 133.3 assault rate. So this one, lower crime rate than most on the list, but also a bit more liberal than most on this list because it's only 42% voted for Trump. 70.6% non-Hispanic white, so a bit whiter than most on this list, but still declining like others in Pennsylvania. No Amtrak access, no Philadelphia commuter rail access either. 74 walkability score, 47 bikeability score. And for cost of living, by the way, this one's a bit more expensive than the others in Pennsylvania because it's closer to Philadelphia. So just keep that in mind. So anyway, yeah, that's all the ones on this list. So, I mean, judging by all the different factors, I don't know which one comes out ahead because it really depends on your own personal preferences, like which factors are the deal breakers for you, what's more important, like is it more important to have a high white percentage? Is it more important to have a high Trump voting percentage? Is it more important to have a really low crime rate? Is it more important to have like really low cost of living? Is it more important to have really beautiful historic architecture? Or also, for instance, like how walkable it is or Amtrak access, not to mention the climate and natural disasters factor, which climate preferences depend on your personal preferences, right? Like some people like hot weather, some people like cold weather. I would say overall, though, St. Augustine and Westchester fare pretty well. Charleston fares pretty well. But again, with St. Augustine and Charleston, there's all these climate and natural disasters to worry about. So yeah, overall, it depends though. If you don't mind being around Hispanics, then like maybe Bethlehem, Pennsylvania doesn't fare that badly. And some of the other Pennsylvania ones on this list. like like Lebanon, for instance. But again, it's all relative. But yeah, I think all things considered, though, if you're looking for a place that is walkable, but also not totally liberal and doesn't have a super high crime rate, then and that does have historic architecture, then you could do much worse than these cities. So yeah, and again, these are all they vary a lot in population. Um, some like they're all under 1 million in the metropolitan area, and some of them can be as low as like 20 or 30,000. So these cities and towns vary a lot in population, but they're all big enough that they're not like villages, but they're small enough that they're not like huge metropolitan areas. So yeah, those are my thoughts on all those cities and towns.